The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinePodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click support us at ItalianWinePodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille.
Welcome to Masterclass US Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. This show has been designed to demystify the US market for Italian wineries through interviews with experts in sales and distribution, social media, communications, and so much more. We will quiz each of our esteemed guests at the end of each episode to solidify the lessons that we've learned. So sharpen your pencils, get out your notebooks, and join us each week to learn more about the US market. Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Vanessa Conlin to the Italian Wine Podcast. Vanessa is an MW based in Napa who does work on behalf of Sotheby's as well as a number of other fine wine clients. She's previously worked with e-commerce provider Wine Access as well as a number of other luxury brands in Napa. Vanessa, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Juliana. I'm a big fan of the show, so I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's always very fun to interview and chat with old friends. So I'm very excited to have you here today. But before we dive into our conversation around the auction market for Italian wine and luxury wines, just tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming a master of wine. I mean, that's such an incredible achievement that not many can boast. So tell us a little bit more about your background.
Well, thank you. It was definitely the hardest thing and the best thing I think I've ever done. I got into the wine business when I was living in New York. I ended up going to college at Manhattan School of Music to pursue a career in opera. So I really didn't have wine on my radar at all. Initially, I didn't come from a wine family. My family are musicians, and I just sort of assumed that that's what I was going to do. And, I love music, but, being surrounded by so much food culture and wine culture in New York, there was something that really was interesting to me and reminded me of music in a way. The words that we use, even like harmony and balance, or, there's a certain sort of theatric element even to just, opening a bottle of wine was something that intrigued me and I wanted to learn more about. So essentially, I started at the very bottom. I started taking some amateur classes in New York. It completely captivated me and I decided to kind of start over completely. So I, worked my way up through the WSET classes in New York. I took a job at a retailer on the Upper West Side for literally like minimum wage. I mean, just to learn, just to be around the buyer and hear her talk and describe wines and sit in on the tastings. And, I kind of never looked back. I still love music. It's such a part of my life. But once I got the bug, there wasn't any turning back.
Mm-hmm.
So after working in New York, for several years, I worked for an importer. As I mentioned, I'd worked for some retailers. I ended up working my way up to be the buyer and the manager of that first retail store where I worked, as well as for another retailer and a wine bar.
Okay.
And in my studies, though, at that point, I was still in diploma. I had never worked around vineyards and production. And of course, I'd taken trips out to, various wine regions, Napa being one of them, and just felt this calling, like I need to be around the vines. This is, I need this as part of my, not just my wine career, but like my soul, to be around these living, growing things. Yeah. And then watching it happen every year, starting over and seeing what Mother Nature is going to hand us. So I moved out here to Napa Valley, started working for some luxury properties. And when I finished diploma, I really thought that was as far as I was going to go. I, to be honest, I was a little burnt out.
Mm-hmm. I bet it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and I was starting my kind of new life out here. And but I would say after a short period of time, two things happened. One is that there's an amazing community of MWs out here, of which I,
Mm-hmm.
became friends with a number of them. And so I felt fortunate that I was able to sort of ask questions and be guided about, what the journey would be so I could confidently enter the program. And the other was just like, I was working at a winery at the time and I would get frustrated with myself. Let's say if the winemaker was talking about something and I didn't fully understand it, he was talking about pH or something, I just was like, God, I really, I miss learning, I realized. So I started the MW program and, that I never looked back. It was an amazing journey. And I say really, aside from the knowledge, the best part was the people that I've met along the way. Yeah, there's a fantastic study group out here that I would meet with every Sunday, and we saw each other at our very best and we saw each other at our very worst. And there's a certain, amount of like bond, bond and trust that is, invaluable. So those will be my friends for life.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And do you think moving to Napa from New York City really inspired that decision to take the leap to become an MW?
That's a good question. I think I probably would have become bored eventually without learning, without continuing to learn, because I'm just a very intellectually curious person. But I don't know that I would have come to it as soon. And I think it would have been a lot harder. Obviously such a plethora of amazing wines to enjoy in New York. And there's a good amount of people studying there. But I just think being here, being around the vineyards, being able to really go up to, a winemaker and just say, like, let me just shadow you for an afternoon.
Right.
Was, invaluable learning experience. And, I had vineyard managers who would let me literally like sit in their pickup truck and just ask them a million questions as they're driving around kind of checking on vineyards. And so
that's amazing.
I think I still would have done it, but it wouldn't have been as easy a choice. And I don't think it would have been, I think it would have been a much harder journey.
Right. Yeah. And not just, are you curious, Vanessa? You're very high achieving, I would add as well.
Thank you.
Well, great. And it's great to hear a little bit about your story and for our listeners as well, to just understand your journey from musician to master of wine and what you're doing today. So today, Vanessa, we're going to talk about the luxury and collectible market for Italian wine. And our 3 key takeaways for our masterclass are: number 1, what wines and categories are trending right now in the luxury market in Italian wine? Number 2, how are back vintage Italian wines doing in the collector's market and some of those older vintages? And then finally, what are some of the future and growth opportunities for the Italian wine segment in this luxury sector? And this is a topic we have talked about before on the podcast, but it's one that I really like revisiting because I think there's a lot of untapped potential and opportunity in this space that our audience is especially interested in. So just for starters, I like to start with definitions. What is your definition of luxury wine?
So this is it's a great and it's a tough question, because I think it's very easy to try to simplify it to price. And I've heard other people's definitions. I've read them. I've heard other MWs even talk about, give it a number where it's $100 or $500. When studying for the MW exam, often for the practical, which is the blind tasting, we would be asked to put a price on it. And for considering the MW, we have to understand the entire market, not just the luxury buyer. $50 was my definition of luxury when I was blind tasting. And then, beyond that, maybe ultra luxury was over 100. But when you think about the entire world of wine drinkers, $50 is pretty luxurious for a lot of people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for me, I think there's a lot of talk of, obviously it has to be high quality. I've heard like Liz Tosh, who's an MW, she says it has to come from a special place on earth. She also defines it as being scarce, and provides a sense of privilege and pleasure to the owners is her definition. I agree with a lot of that. I think what I don't necessarily agree with in my definition is scarcity.
Okay.
Because I think if you look at something like even the first growth Bordeaux's, or let's look at Dom Perignon or Krug, these are not houses or chateaux that are afraid of volume at all.
Great for me.
And they still are considered luxury, ultra luxury wines. But I do think that whether it's small production, large production, whether it has the scarcity or, what I think we can all agree on sometimes is a manufactured sense of scarcity. I think for me, the definition would be consistency over time.
Okay.
A pure enjoyability aspect. And then I think that it's this perception for the consumer of specialness. And I don't think specialness has to be small quantity, medium, large. I think that it's the desirability and I think the ability to tell a story of that house, of the place. And of course has to deliver quality to price ratio, whatever that price is.
Right. And I think that story part, you touched on, and especially in the context of, you said some larger houses and the champagne category, for example, beyond story too, I might add just the value that the consumer feels when they are drinking your product. It's like putting on a pair of Gucci shoes, right? Or Manolo Blahniks. There's an inherent just value that you identify with that brand when you wear that piece of clothing or those shoes. And the same way, when you open this bottle of wine in the luxury space, the brand gives you a certain level of feeling, to luxury too. And I think that's something that is valuable as well to think about in this space. Is just, what's that inherent value that you're giving to the consumer by way of your brand? What are you transposing to them by way of them putting your wine on their table, right?
I completely agree with you. And I think, people gravitate toward brands that they identify with for whatever reason. It's style, it's the history, it's the, and maybe it is sometimes it's the price tag or the scarcity, but I agree with you, that story, like something has to connect you beyond just a price tag. There's this word that, or this phrase that used to use at a previous position that I've always stuck with me, which is kind of this social currency, which is, if you were going to walk into a party with a bottle of wine, or you're going to walk in with your Manolo Blahniks, or, someone asks you, well, why, like, what is it about that? What made you decide to wear that? Or what made you decide to bring this bottle? If they have to really struggle to explain like why it was special enough that they wanted to share it or wear it, then I don't think that's a brand that has longevity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. The consumer needs to understand the value that your brand is bringing to them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, thinking a little more specifically about Italian wines in this space, what brands, what categories do you historically see performing well when we think about that luxury market?
So I think, like defining our terms on this question is kind of where I want to start. So, when we talk about performing well, are we talking about, because I have thoughts on both, but like, is it literally like quantity sold, and profitability? Or is it, reputation, let's say? So I think, when we look at things that are performing well, just talking about sort of saturation of the market. Obviously, these are brands that have good PR departments, marketing departments. So obviously the larger companies, because they have the money, the financial strength behind them to do well. I think though too, there's something like when I think, the first thing I think of with Italian wines in terms of a category or region, a place doing well, it's Super Tuscans. And I think that obviously we have some huge names there that people understand, the Ornellayas, the Sassicaia, the Tignanellos, these, have this cachet and this interesting story. But I think there's also something to be said for just the varieties used. It's, when you look at Italy, it's a place where if you're a Bordeaux drinker or you're a Napa drinker, you can identify with some of these varieties, these blends, that's easier to understand. Now, I personally am a huge fan of, Piedmont, but I think when talking to consumers, it's much harder to understand if you're saying, well, what's, which cru do you like? Do you like Canubi or Monprevado or Busia? Like, it's a deeper dive to really kind of understand that place than something like Tuscany, which I think is, I think it's much easier to
right
grasp.
Exactly. I think we were talking specifically about the U.S. market here, so I'm glad you brought that point up, Vanessa, about how well a Super Tuscan category might translate for the U.S. consumer who maybe started their wine journey in Napa Cab, and that's where they started spending more money on wine, to transfer over to a wine like a Sassicaia or Ornellaia than perhaps some of these more esoteric wines. So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, if you can elaborate a little bit more when we think about those categories, talk to us just a little bit how you see them actually executed in the market in terms of like how they're being sold. Is it through auction? Is it through consultants and like fine wine advisors? Is it at restaurants? Is it off premise? Like, talk to us just a little bit more about that.
So I think all of the channels that you named are important. Of course, we've got, we have on and off premise. We have restaurants, collectors. We've got auction. We've got e-commerce. We have a lot of people who are doing private sort of hand sell, VIP kind of sales as well. That's really doing very well in the market, in the U.S. market, I should say. So I think. I think all of those are feasible. I would say it's almost, could be like a whole topic for podcast, because I think when we look at certain things, let's use e-commerce for one. So I think if you look at, these sites that are designed, they send email marketing out. They're successful in a number of different ways. Usually value, right?
Right.
Price. You have to grab somebody very quickly because everybody's inundated with a gazillion emails these days. So is it a price? Is it a discount? Is it the score that it receives? Like, it has to be really quick. And that's how those brands are successful. Whereas I think if you have, let's say, like a specialty retailer or a restaurant with a great sommelier, they have the time and the luxury to sort of tell the story behind the brand. But what I wanted to say was, like, that doesn't mean that there can't be success in both. And it's kind of, you're leading into, sort of going back to something you brought up, but something I definitely want to talk about more is that story. Because even if you're looking at something like an e-commerce site where there usually is a big hook, like, you still have to have something. You still have to be able, what's your elevator pitch about your brand, about your wine that you make? Because, and please no one take offense, I think terroir is excruciatingly important to wine, but like, everybody talks about, well, we make wine with, sense of place, with terroir. Well, so does pretty much everybody else. Like, that's what we're all trying to do, right? And so I think really understanding what differentiates you, and that can be that can be like a one sentence, a one liner, or that can be a long form story that someone's going to latch onto and tell you tableside at a Michelin restaurant. But I think there has to be a there.
Right.
And we're talking specifically about Italy, of course. I would say this probably to, wineries from any region. But I think, especially going back to your original question about what's doing well, it's much easier for something like a Super Tuscan for the reasons that we talked about. But that doesn't mean that, like, Barolo can't have that same opportunity. But I think they need to, what my advice would be, get really clear.
Right.
Get really clear on what's your story.
Mm-hmm.
Get really clear on what's the brand proposition and the value here, so that you help them get into the category and understand the category.
I think that is really, really valuable advice. I think for those of us who are in Italian wine and love Italian wine, we don't even think about the complexity anymore of the regions, of the laws, of the labeling, and how confusing it can be for a consumer. So taking that step back, even for a fine wine consumer who might be drinking a lot of French and California wine, Italian wine can be intimidating in terms of how to understand it. So I think, Vanessa, that is really, really super valuable advice for our listeners.
Italian Wine Podcast, part of the Mama Jumbo Shrimp family.
We talked about this a little bit, in our intro about the value proposition of luxury wine, but let's talk about today. I mean, things have changed so much in the last 5 years and in the wine industry, and how people are consuming wine, buying wine. What do you think the consumer right now in the luxury space, or the space in which you're engaged, is looking for when they're looking to engage with a brand, or they're going to make a big purchase on a specific producer? What do you think they're really looking for?
So I think I'm really glad you asked me this question. As I think there's also, we're, of course, especially for this podcast and this takeaway, like, we want to keep things simple. But one thing that is a little complex is I think that there isn't one luxury buyer. I don't think it's one homogenous group. And it's something that you said that I think is really, really sharp and correct, which is that, what is it worth to you? If it's that type of, is it status? And that's fine. I will not name the winery, but it's out here in Napa. I've been fortunate enough to have tasted it. But it's very hard to taste. It's very expensive. It is very scarce. And, but I've had people say, well, is it worth it? And I say, well, it's a beautiful bottle of wine, but it's a lot more expensive than other beautiful bottles of wine. And then but that says, then, is it worth it to you? And if it is, then 100% you should buy that bottle, whatever reason it is. If it's status, if it's because you really are going to drink it, then great. But it's kind of, what's it worth? What is it worth to you as the consumer? But I think, to go a little bit back to I think the core of your question is what they're looking for is, times have really, they change slowly in the wine business, obviously. And there's been a lot of talk of the different cohorts and how they're behaving or engaging or not engaging with wines. But I think it goes back to that unique selling proposition. But I think it really is a step beyond that. there's a human need for connection.
Right.
Right. And this is what I've always loved about wine is like that, it brings us together at a table or over a conversation, and we can disagree, we can agree, we can, pick out different things, but like we're connecting in a way that we're using our senses. So when we're talking, I'm not saying, well, my Excel formula is different than your, it's like, well, no, this is what I'm literally seeing, smelling, tasting,
Right.
feeling, and so the better that we can become at actually really being able to help people, whether it's virtually or in person, like form that connection. I think that's super valuable to any luxury that they want to understand, especially if they've never had it. What am I expecting? I'm going to spend a lot of money on this bottle. What's in the bottle?
Right.
And kind of why should I care? What does it taste like? What's special? But I think the other thing that I'd like to highlight about today's consumer luxury and other is I think people care about things that they maybe didn't, in previous generations, like social responsibility. I think that more and more consumers are asking questions like, how is this wine made? Is it sustainable? Was it organic? Was it biodynamic? I think, there was an article recently that I read about how more and more wineries are becoming B corporations, which is showing, this social responsibility for the environment, but also for people. How are we treating the people that are actually making this wine?
Right.
And so I'd say that if I was launching a brand or even had an existing luxury brand in the market, I'd say like, think about that and think about how you're going to tell your story in a way that shows what you're doing, if you are, in
Right.
terms
It has
of,
to be real, of course.
it has to be real, because I tell you, one thing consumers are really, really great at is they can tell if it's not genuine.
Absolutely.
So tell your genuine story, but I think about the things that you're doing to show that you care about people and the planet. And I think that goes a lot further than in previous generations where maybe it was more just really based on score or price.
Exactly. And I think, back to what you said earlier about really showing the value of your wine, but also the expectation, I think what comes to mind for me is you have to be here in the market presenting your wine yourself in a way and creating experiences and looking for partners, whether it's a Sotheby's or an auction house, or it's a luxury retailer or a great restaurant account, but looking for ways and strategies to get in front of these consumers directly, to tell your story, explain your wines, and hopefully build lifelong connections with those consumers. It's not necessarily about placing an ad or social media marketing, I think, for this market, but it's more about that one-on-one hand sell type of marketing and really being here physically or having a presence in some way physically in the market to build those relationships with this consumer.
I totally agree with that, Juliana. Yeah,
exactly. And that's where, Vanessa, you've come in so many ways, right? You've been such an incredible ambassador through your roles on behalf of so many brands to introduce and tell the story of these wines to consumers. And I think, that's just can't be understated how important that is in this space. So I want to talk a little bit about old vintages. I love drinking my birth year, 1990. It was a great vintage. But I think old vintages get people excited and are one way, at least in my role, I've seen a way to highlight the history, the authenticity of a brand, but also show the investment potential of a wine, right? By opening a bottle from the 1960s or the 1970s. So do you think there's an opportunity for the Italian wine category, specifically in the collector space with old vintages? I know, people boast about their Burgundies and their Bordeauxs and their older vintages, but what about for Italian wines? What do you think?
I think it's huge. I think it's a huge opportunity. Yes. And I think also having those older vintages in the market can build your luxury brand in a way, because it goes back to part of my definition, which is consistency over time. So if people have tasted a younger vintage, that's great. But like, how is this going to age? Do I want to collect this? So I think if you have those vintages, those library vintages, and you can have them in the U.S. market, I think it's huge. When I worked in e-commerce, if we had the opportunity to offer an older vintage, I mean, we would sell out just, almost instantly, because it's more rare these days too, of course, especially with urban living, that people have the opportunity to hold on to bottles for a long period of time. So through that, but then I also think, restaurants, I was recently at Cafe Carmelini in New York, which is kind of like the hot spot right now, but they have a MS is the wine director, loves Italian wine, like really went deep in vintages on certain things. And I mean, I would go back there in a heartbeat because of that, because I collect bottles, but when I have the opportunity to buy something with some maturity, I jump at it.
Absolutely. So, if you have a cellar and you have those old vintage wines, maybe looking at your US partners and whoever you're working with to get those wines to market, it sounds like it's a great way, like you said, Vanessa, to show the value, to show the consistency of the brand.
Absolutely.
Beyond the old vintages, as we just talked about, do you think there's other potential opportunities in the luxury wine sector for Italian wine, let's say beyond the obvious, which I'll state as Super Tuscan, Brunello, yes, and, Barolo? Beyond those three big categories, do you think there's some other regions, even specific producers, things that you're seeing pop up in your world for Italian wine in the luxury space?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I think Sicilian wines are having a huge moment. I think that,
no doubt.
that, hugely gastronomic wines and in the grand scheme of things, I think you can find some amazing values. So absolutely. And even something, I was, I was in Japan earlier this spring, and I was in Okinawa, and I was fascinated to find Paolo Bea on a list there.
Huh.
Yeah. And which I discovered here in the United States, and I'm a fan, but I think that just even shows, like, for these really unique, high quality wines, again, going back to the story, like, that's an interesting story. And, he has a unique style. There's massive opportunity, not just in the US, but globally.
Yeah. Yeah, Paolo, that's interesting that a producer like that in Japan you'd find. I think that goes back too, I think, to some of the inherent value that brand holds for the consumer. I know when I sold wine at Italy, I mean, Paolo Bea was over 10 years ago, was definitely a desired producer, and people come in looking for those labels. So thinking about how a brand like that created this story or this legend around their wines to create that demand in the market.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down, this is such a great conversation. It could go on for much longer, preferably over a beautiful old vintage glass of Chianti Classico. Yes. Maybe next time. But as we wind down, we'll do our rapid fire quiz that we do at the end of every episode. So if you can do your best to answer these questions in just 1 or 2 sentences, that would be great. Mm-hmm. Question number 1, what is your number 1 tip for mastering the U.S. wine market?
So I think it really goes down to either spending time here or having someone on the ground, whether that's your importer, your distributor, consultant, that can guide you, because it is so complex. You touched on this earlier, Juliana. I mean, laws just by state are so painfully complicated. So having someone that you know and trust that can guide you, and then understanding too that it's the U.S. isn't just one market. We've got the coastal cities, we've got the Midwest, which people sometimes forget about. But I read somewhere, I think, like the number 1 state for millionaires with homes or billionaires is Wyoming. And some of these people, these collectors, they don't just live in one place. They want to drink well, no matter where they are. So just remember,
I just got back from Aspen Food and Wine, and let me tell you, there's a lot of wealthy people out there, no doubt.
Exactly. So just remembering, it's a huge country. There's lots of different opportunities, and don't forget about the ones that aren't the obvious.
Great advice. Question number 2, what is something that you might have told your younger professional self about working in the wine industry?
Good question. Okay, well, what I didn't see coming, I guess, was sort of this social influencer phase. Like, I think that that there's still such a huge value on expertise, but I definitely didn't see that coming, that there was going to be this sort of rise of kind of peer reviews and just the impact that for good or for bad, that social media can have on the trajectory of a certain brand or even a style of wine.
Right. Or even individual, right? I think, these days too, just if you're a professional in wine, the way you're using your own social media, whether that's LinkedIn or Instagram, can play a big role in your network.
Totally. And it goes back to that human connection too. Like, is your social media, is it actually telling your story, or is it just kind of taking up space?
Right. Exactly. I can't tell you how many people now know that I like to run because I post about it on Instagram, and then that just becomes a human factor in the way that you interact with people in your community.
Exactly.
And finally, we all travel a lot in this industry. What is one of your favorite travel hacks when you're traveling for work?
So I don't know if this is a hack or not, but I always travel with my my eye mask. And also I have an app on my phone for white noise, which I can't tell you has come in so handy because, I live here in Napa. I'm very lucky. It's not, I'm not living with a bunch of, sirens and traffic and stuff going by. So it's usually pretty quiet. And so when I travel, internationally or not, to be frank, sometimes I'm just like, how do people how can you possibly sleep? But my white noise machine has saved me many a times.
That's a great tip. White noise machine. Okay. Or an app, you said, not even a separate machine, just an app on the phone.
Right. I used to have a little machine that was pretty lightweight that I would cart around, but now it's so easy now with apps. You can just use your phone.
Great tip. Well, Vanessa, thank you again so much for joining us today. How can our listeners follow along and connect with you?
Oh, thank you. So I'm on Instagram at Vanessa Conlin MW. I also, my website is Vanessa Conlin MW, so easy to remember either way. So those are the two best ways.
All right. Wonderful. Thanks again, Vanessa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned each week for new episodes of Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. And remember, if you enjoyed today's show, hit the like and follow buttons wherever you get your podcasts.